Right, so in the wrestling world, there are so many wrestling promotions and wrestling companies, and so many of them unfortunately don't make it and go under. And this can be for a variety of reasons, whether it be due to poor show quality or low attendance, or the company's own negligence and getting into controversy and drama. As today, we're going to be discussing a few examples of the latter as we look at wrestling promotions that had to shut their doors due to their own negligence and getting caught in controversy and incidents. So like the video, as this is a collection of some of the wrestling promotions that failed and went bankrupt and weren't able to keep their doors open for various reasons and various controversies. Like the video, subscribe, and let's get into it. What happens when a shady wrestling promotion dies and then 10 years later is brought back just to scam everyone all over again? One Pro Wrestling ran their first ever show live from the Doncaster Dome on the 1st of October 2005, and it was the first chapter of a very turbulent tale. 1PW, A Cruel Twist of Fate, their first ever show, featured names such as Chris Sabin, Jerry Lynn, The Blue Meanie, Al Snow, D'Lo Brown, Corey Graves, Austin Aries, Raven, The Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, Abyss, AJ Styles, and more. 1PW were bringing American talent to British soil, and as a result, their shows were stacked. They ran their next set of shows in January of 2006, a two-tag show that featured matches like Abyss vs Sabu, Samoa Joe vs Masato Tanaka, AJ Styles vs Jeff Jarrett, Jerry Lynn vs Petey Williams, and the Unbreakable Triple Threat, but with Charlie Haas also in there. 1PW were not slowing down with the amount of fly-ins and the amount of good talent they were booking. They were essentially just TNA, but on British soil. They had all the foreign talents that they'd fly over, and they mixed them in with a roster of numerous local and British talents. And 1PW would continue in stride in 2006. They ran about a dozen shows in 2006, and kept up with the big names coming in. Names that wrestled and appeared for 1PW in 2006 that I haven't even mentioned yet include Bryan Danielson, Jimmy Snuka, Nigel McGuinness, and Bret Hart. Yes, that's right, one of the biggest names ever in wrestling, who was long retired, was flown in by 1PW to give a 5-minute speech. And of course Teddy Hart made an appearance for them too, because of course he did. It's the mid-2000s, it's an indie show in the mid-2000s, of course Teddy Hart is on it. They also crowned their inaugural champions that year, with Jody Fleisch and Johnny Storm winning the tag titles, Pac winning the openweight title, and Abyss winning the world title. However, booking all these names and spending all this money to fly out talent and pay for their appearance was always going to catch up to them, and unsurprisingly, with the amount that 1PW were flying people in, it came back to bite their ass very quickly. And on January 5th, 2007, at approximately 1:26 PM, 1PW posted a statement on their website announcing they had gone into liquidation. The statement reads as following: "It is with the deepest regret and sadness that 1PW Promotions Limited announces today that the company has ceased trading, effective today, and has entered into liquidation. The cease of trading is effective immediately, and thus all future dates, including the January 13th No Turning Back show, are sadly cancelled. On behalf of 1PW Promotions Limited, I want to extend our heartfelt apology to anyone inconvenienced or disappointed by the cancellation of upcoming shows." They advertise where you can get refunds from, and 1PW chairman Stephen Gortley also left a personal statement in the note saying that he was prepared for the backlash and to not listen to what the dirt sheets are going to be saying about this. Interesting. Stephen Gortley, by the way, is a man who you will hear a lot more about in the next part of this video. 1PW would actually run a show shortly after this, a farewell show titled 1PW Will Not Die, a show that featured a much less stacked card and was very showing of the money they had lost. 1PW went out on a whimper. Or did they? Because just 3 months later, 1PW was back with another show titled 1PW Resurrection, and welcome to the trend of 1PW announcing that they were dead and then just coming back. This is the first of many. 1PW returned to running shows and flying in talents from the States, which where the money came from to do that, who even knows, but you had the likes of El Generico coming onto the show to defend the PWG world title. How 1PW were getting stuff like this booked is still beyond me. In 2008 though, we would see what would be the first in many changes in ownership when Stephen Gauntly bailed out of the company in 2008, and it was taken over by 1PW wrestler Dragon Asu, as well as other wrestlers on the roster. And also that year in 2008, a man named Danny Rod would become owner, and then in 2009 he would become the sole owner of the company. And this would usher in an entirely new era for 1PW. With the ownership of 1PW now in the hands of Danny Rod, 1PW went back to doing 1PW things, booking talents from the States and flying people in with money which nobody knows where they got it from. And it was only about a year and a half before 1PW would get another death announcement. In August of 2010, another statement was posted by 1PW. They announced they had to cancel all their upcoming shows due to outstanding debts from a show they ran in Liverpool, with talent not getting paid. However, at the very end of the statement, Danny says it's not the end of 1PW, it's just see you down the road. Following this, fans of 1PW would start a campaign to get new investors behind the company, and well, it seemingly worked, because 3 months later, the 1PW website was updated to say, personally from Danny Rod, 1PW is back and soon to be better than ever. Keep checking for updates. 1PW had been bailed out again. And 1PW seemingly had big plans under these new investors, as in February of 2011 it was announced that Shawn Michaels would be coming to 1PW to appear for them in October of 2011 and do a UK tour. This was huge. Shawn Michaels had retired less than just a year prior and was still a huge name, and a name that a lot of people wanted to see. It was announced that the tour Shawn Michaels will be doing in the UK would consist of him appearing at 1PW shows in Doncaster, as well as doing a meet and greet in Oxford. 1PW also announced a tour of the Middle East and a trip to Dubai, of all places. So seemingly a lot of money was being pumped into 1PW, but once again, this is 1PW, and unfortunately, nothing ever lasts in 1PW. On July 2nd of 2011, a post was made to the UK fan forums that reads as followed. Just seen on Facebook, Mark Sloan's meet and greet in Oxford in October with HBK has been cancelled. I wonder what implications this could have for 1PW. Your first question based on this post is probably, who is Mark Sloan? Mark Sloan is a wrestling promoter based in the UK, and this post also mentions the meet and greet in Oxford, which is something I mentioned before was taking place with Shawn Michaels. Essentially, Mark Sloan was the promoter behind the meet and greet in Oxford, which was a completely separate thing to his 1PW appearances. Mark Sloan though would actually respond to this post saying that he had received information that caused them to pull the appearance of Shawn Michaels, and that every single ticket had been refunded for the meet and greet. Interestingly though, he also went on to say, we felt it was best for the people who purchased tickets to have their money returned, and for us to stop advertising the fact he would be in the UK on that date. Almost implying that, well, Shawn Michaels wasn't gonna be in the UK on that date. Despite this though, 1PW continued to advertise that Shawn Michaels would be appearing for them. 6 days later, WrestleZone posted an article that showed an email statement from Shawn Michaels' agents, and while the original article with the email does not exist anymore due to Shawn Michaels' agents asking to take it down, I'm guessing that this statement was something to do with the fact that this appearance wasn't happening. However, following the posting of that article, WrestleZone were contacted to say that 1PW and Shawn Michaels were still negotiating. However, after this, 1PW simply just went silent, and they closed their doors once again, leaving the fans fuming as they didn't have a Shawn Michaels meet and greet, nor did they have refunds. However, after weeks of silence, Danny Rod finally came out in August of 2011 to release a statement. In his statement, Danny claims to be a victim of a scam and that the fall has been placed on him for HBK ultimately not making it to the UK, saying that he has taken the heat away from the main culprit. But regardless of who was to blame, fans were left in the dark, Shawn Michaels never came, fans never got a refund, and 1PW was finished. Or was it? Because somehow 11 years later, 1PW returned with its original ownership.
Remember when the dream became reality? When a monster was unleashed? when kings captured their crowns.
OnePW announced a new twist of fate would be taking place October 1st, 2022 from the Doncaster Dome on Fight TV, and on the poster featured big names like Mickie James, Ruby Soho, and Rob Van Dam. In case you're wondering why it was called a new twist of fate, it's because the first ever OnePW show was called A Cruel Twist of Fate, which I learned recently it was called that because Matt Hardy was meant to be on that show, but then he wasn't in the end, and OnePW just kept the name because that's the most OnePW thing of all time. OnePW managing director Stephen Gauntly stated that this was the perfect time to bring OnePW back, and that he's always had a passion for what OnePW was able to achieve many years ago. But pause. Managing director Stephen Gauntly, I recognize that name. In fact, Stephen Gauntly is a name I mentioned in my last video, as he was the original founder and owner of OnePW. He owned OnePW from 2005 until 2008, and somehow he's bringing the company back 14 years later. But I can tell you that in 14 years, Gauntly hadn't gone anywhere. Post-initial OnePW death, it's known that Stephen Gauntly got involved in the arcade business, or the miniature arcade business, I don't really know what to call it. But searching for Stephen Gauntly Arcade on Google can find you this mention of Stephen Gauntly in 2011, 3 years after he left OnePW. It's an article on a site called retrothing.com talking about a business called Retro Heart, and they're a business that seemingly make miniature arcade game cabinets, and as you can guess, this business is owned by Stephen Gauntly. And hey, scrolling at these pictures, hey, it all seems pretty cool, seems all well and good until you scroll down to the comments on this article. Hi, I'm posting here to tell everyone to avoid Retro Heart like the plague. This guy Stephen G ships poor quality, faulty, and incomplete items, very different from the ones advertised in the images. He's also a natural born liar that will have excuses ready, will promise replacements and refunds, and will keep you waiting with lies for weeks before he actually stops replying to emails and disappears. Sounds kinda familiar, doesn't it? He goes on to say that essentially he ordered an item from Retro Heart, it came through and it was poor quality, so he asked for a replacement before eventually asking for a refund when that couldn't be provided, and he was just straight up ghosted by Stephen after false promises of a refund coming. Another comment right below it reads, Stephen Gauntly, who allegedly produces these miniatures, accepted $300 of my money and never sent me anything. It's been 2.5 months. He no longer replies to my emails. So it seemed as though Stephen Gauntly had taken his scamming ways to the miniature arcade scene as well. But believe it or not, Stephen Gauntly actually made a short-lived return to wrestling promotion even before the revived OnePW, as it was announced on February 5th, 2013 that Pro Wrestling Republic would be running a show at the Lead Mill in Sheffield. This was Pro Wrestling Republic's first ever show, and when it was revealed that the owner was Stephen Gauntly, people had their hesitations. And well, some didn't. Some trusted this guy still for whatever reason, and they were excited for a show that was to feature the likes of Steve Corino, Chris Travis, Hijo del Rey Mysterio, and many more. And if you haven't guessed already, this show of course never took place. The show was cancelled just weeks before, with talent not being paid and fans not getting refunds once again. So yeah, with all that being said, this is the guy we are trusting to bring back 1PW. I wonder how this is gonna go. 1PW A New Twist of Fate took place on the 1st of October 2022 in the Doncaster Dome to an attendance of 1,533, and it featured names such as Ace Austin, Alexander Hamilstone, Colt Cabana, Mickey James, Christopher Daniels, Rob Van Dam, and Jamie Hayter. It was a stacked card and seemingly things went pretty smooth. Fair enough. Their next show, No Turning Back, took place on the 18th of February. It featured names like The Rascals, Ruby Soho, Taya Valkyrie, Rhino, John Morrison, and Will Ospreay. Then 2 months later, All or Nothing took place. This featured a tournament to crown a new 1PW World Heavyweight Champion, featuring people like Will Ospreay, Bobby Fish, Mark Haskins, Lance Archer, all in the tournament, with Will Ospreay being crowned the winner. We also saw Lizzie Evo win the 1PW Women's World title, Robbie X win the 1PW Openweight title, and Leon Slater and Man Like Doris win the 1PW Tag Team titles. All in all, it was actually looking pretty okay for 1PW. All things considered, all three shows had gone off without a hitch. There was no talks of anything going badly. That was until the build up to their June 10th, 2023 show Devil's Due, when Matt Cardona took to Twitter to complain that 1PW had not yet paid him for his upcoming appearance for them. In a now deleted tweet, Matt Cardona wrote, "Unless I get my payment that I was promised before this match was advertised today, this match isn't happening. Sorry fans," in response to a 1PW post promoting his match at the show. However, Matt Cardona would actually follow up on this few hours later saying, "Update, I got my money from One Pro Wrestling. It's a shame I had to make a public tweet to get it, but it is what it is. I can't wait to make my return to the UK. I'm really looking forward to Cardona versus Will Ospreay. It's going to be an instant classic, and Steph DeLander will now be there too." So, water under the bridge it seemed. It was all good in the end. Devil's Due took place as scheduled, Matt Cardona had his match as scheduled, and again, seemingly, the show went off without a hitch. That was until 1PW went silent following the show, and when 1PW goes silent like that, you know that something is going down within the company. And it's not a good thing. And eventually news had hit that 1PW had gone bankrupt and were looking for investors. 1PW would finally respond to everything on their Facebook on the 8th of July, saying it has been a very challenging few weeks for the company. There have been changes of shareholders and changes of directorship and logistical challenges. Keeping it as vague as possible, really. Then a week later, a statement was posted saying that Stephen Gauntly was now 100% owner of 1PW, and that their October 28th show that was still up in the air, that fans didn't know whether it was still happening or not, is apparently still going ahead. Know Your Enemy scheduled for October 28th, and it had the likes of Matt Cardona, James Storm, Steph DeLander, and various UK talent and imports coming for the show. However, I don't think you'd be surprised to know that as of now, that event is not happening. In fact, there are no 1PW shows scheduled in the future. They've all been cancelled. So this is something I don't know if I went over in my last video or not, I can't remember, but a statement that Stephen Gauntly, the owner of 1PW and original founder, left following the reports of talent not being paid was he left this notes at statement on Twitter reading, "It has been rumored on this app that people are owed money by 1PW. To clarify, one wrestler is on a payment plan and every other wrestler, crew member and staff member has been paid for their work with us. Any other inference is completely untrue and a complete lie. 1PW's relaunch was with 2 promoters and now is with 1. Any wrestlers wishing to work for our former co-promoter and not us, we wish well and hope they flourish in those surroundings. Thanks, Stephen Gauntly." This at the time it was posted was already and quickly debunked as a lie, with people coming out and saying, "No, hey, you haven't paid us, you are just lying to us right now." And also, a wrestler is on a payment plan? We're paying wrestlers on Klarna now? My goodness. If you have to pay a wrestler on a payment plan, then you shouldn't be running a show. And yeah, like I said, following this statement, they strided on and they were looking to put on their next show, Know Your Enemy. But just this last week, it was discovered that Stephen Gauntly had resigned from 1PW, and this was not announced publicly or anything like that. 1PW hadn't come out and said Stephen Gauntly's leaving, or Stephen Gauntly came out and said, hey, I'm resigning from 1PW. No, it was discovered by someone else looking on his government page. Obviously, it's all public record, so it was found out through that way and posted to social media. And after that, the floodgates had opened as wrestlers and talent scheduled to be on the upcoming 1PW shows started to talk and tell us what was going on, and it became apparent that Stephen Gauntly was fleeing the scene and abandoning ship. He did not have the facilities to run the show. Wrestlers and crew on the show started to tweet about the fact that they were owed money for this show and starting to speak about Stephen Gauntly, including Matt Cardona, who confirms the upcoming show Know Your Enemy wasn't taking place by tweeting, "Attention promoters who want the Indie God in 2023. This one pro wrestling show isn't happening, and the promoter Stephen Gauntly didn't have the balls to tell me himself or respond to my messages. I should have learnt my lesson after I had to tweet to get paid my deposit for the last show, lol. Sorry to the UK fans who were planning on seeing me." And then announcer Joe Dombrowski, who was scheduled to be on the show, tweeted out a thread of his experiences with 1PW on the lead up to this show. And he exposed Stephen Gauntly for, of course, lying about paying everyone, with multiple are owed a total of 1,000, plus owes many fans merch and refunds, embezzled 1PW income to his personal account while lying to rest of management, tried to fraudulently sell 10% of 1PW stock by claiming assets he didn't own, manipulated wrestlers on his own roster to facilitate loans from those close to them not in wrestling. Only a small percent was paid back. Owes someone formerly close to him £10,000 used to restart 1PW. Lied to those waiting on June money that he wasn't paying October deposits. Claims the only reason he was resigning from the company was because he fell down the stairs. Has blocked countless people who have been pursuing their money. Has resigned as a director without appointing a replacement. Also illegal. I'll leave the link to this thread in the description. It has all the images on there. It's a pretty crazy thread. Some other stuff that's also gone down since this thread was posted is 1PW have completely wiped themselves off of social media, with their Facebook page being deleted and now also their Twitter page being deleted. I didn't actually realize it had been deleted because they had blocked me, so I couldn't actually search for them anyway. However, one account they do still have is an Instagram account, and they posted a statement on their Instagram account. They finally posted a statement themselves, and it reads, "With regret, 1PW Limited has ceased trading and all future events are cancelled. We would advise customers seeking ticket refunds to discuss the matter with their card issuer or bank. The board of directors are currently seeking professional advice." And yeah, reading that back, I don't know about you, but that statement is just a massive slap on the face to all the people who were looking for refunds on the show and are still awaiting payment. And the "we would advise customers seeking ticket refunds to discuss the matter with their card issuer or bank." That's basically them just saying, hey, we're not going to refund you, sort it out yourselves. Like, again, just a complete slap in the face. And I guarantee you there'll be fans here that were going to this show or bought tickets to meet and greets or any future 1PW show, merchandise, anything from 1PW, that are never going to see that money again now because Stephen Gauntly has fled the scene. Who are we even to believe there is a board of directors who are currently seeking professional advice? The venue for the upcoming show Know Your Enemy, the Doncaster Dome, posted that they are looking into the issues raised around the 1PW event, so have decided to pause ticket sales for the time being. We will provide an update to customers as soon as we have more information, so hopefully the Doncaster Dome are working to hopefully and potentially help provide some refunds for this show. So it seems as though this is finally the end of the 1PW saga. I have now made 3 videos about One Pro Wrestling and all the times they have scammed their fans. It has been nearly 17 years, or probably just over 17 years, of this company scamming their fans. They left and they came back to do it all over again. And in 5 years' time, we'll probably see them come back and attempt to do it again, and for some reason, people will fall for it again. Regardless, I do hope all the talent and crew on the shows do get paid the money they're owed. I unfortunately can't see it ever happening where everyone does get paid. I think there's probably always going to be someone who's owed money by 1PW because that's just the kind of company 1PW are. And with all that being said, my final message is that when 1PW inevitably returns in some time in the next 10 years, don't fall for it again, and don't take the booking from them. I beg. Wrestle Circus held its first show in October 2016 and started out as an indie promotion showcasing some of the best talent from Texas and surrounding areas with some stars sprinkled in. But it would evolve very quickly into one of the top indie promotions where many of the biggest stars today that we see in WWE and AEW would perform on. I mean, even just on their first show, they had the likes of Adam Page, Dijak, Keith Lee, Sammy Guevara, Ricky Starks, EC3, and other talent you might recognize. And from here, the shows got bigger with more and more talent from across the country appearing on the shows, including guys who are currently on TV like Cody Rhodes, who made a few appearances in 2017. And Wrestle Circus were also one of the first wrestling companies to use Twitch to livestream their shows, and by using Twitch to livestream their shows, it meant they could use and broadcast talent who were under Impact or AAA contracts without violating their contracts, and thus Wrestle Circus became an appealing promotion for wrestlers to work on because of the Twitch integration. And by the tail end of 2017, Wrestle Circus had loads of momentum and were fresh off doing a show headlined by Cody Rhodes, but in November of 2017, just a few days before their upcoming show for the month, it was suddenly announced that the show was cancelled. Nothing was said as to why this had happened, and fans and talent were both left in the dark. But it was eventually revealed and found out that it was due to the promoter's personal health issues, but still, little info was out there. However, it was assumed that the circus was dead. That was until out of nowhere a year later, they came back for a run of 2 more shows before they had to go on hiatus again due to not being able to find a building to run the shows in. And after another year of quiet, the circus would return again in May 2019 and genuinely looked like Wrestle Circus was back, as they would keep running events and announce their next event at each event. A shot for every time I said event. However, lightning would strike twice, as just a couple of days before their July 28th event, the show was cancelled, with fans and wrestlers left in the dark once again. And it wouldn't be until an email was leaked from the promoter to the wrestlers where we found out what had happened. It basically said that the show was cancelled and Wrestle Circus is shut for good, as he just wasn't fit to be a wrestling promoter. And that bringing back Wrestle Circus was a big mistake that he did against the advice of a lot of people. Talent were left stranded, fans were left wanting refunds, and since then, Wrestle Circus has not returned, and it's been 5 years now, so I highly doubt that it ever does return. Chikara opened its doors in the year 2000, first as a wrestling school under the name of the Wrestle Factory, founded by Mike Quackenbush and Tom Carter. And in 2002, it would expand into the wrestling promotion known as Chikara, and Chikara was a unique promotion as it would attract top indie talent, including the likes of CM Punk, who worked the first ever Chikara show. And while some talent like Punk just worked under themselves and their regular characters, oftentimes talent would come in and work under a completely different character and a completely different name and look. Chikara in a way was a non-canon promotion where wrestlers would come in and do stuff completely differently to what they were usually doing on other promotions. And Chikara itself was also like if a comic book was real and was a wrestling promotion. All the shows were connected, and there is so much lore and history to Chikara and all their storylines that I couldn't even begin to be able to discuss it all in this video. But throughout the 2000s, Chikara would remain one of the top indie promotions and a true alternative to your WWEs, TNAs, and any other wrestling promotion out there. Their big shows were their King of Trios shows, which was a yearly trios tournament they did, and they had some awesome teams competing each year, including some of the biggest names in the indies at the time. There were teams that were themed, such as when Jordan Grace, P.E. Williams, and Scott Steiner all teamed up, and they'd also do reunions, such as when Justin Gabriel, Darren Young, and Michael Tarver reunited in 2018 as the Nexus for the tournament. However, there was definitely a turning point for Chikara where their downfall begun, and whilst factors like WWE and other major companies scooping up all the indie talent definitely played a part in the wrestling company's demise, Chikara had already lost a large portion of its fan base after the promotion shut down for a year as part of a storyline. When Chikara did return from that storyline shutdown, I don't even know what to call it, many many of its fans didn't return, and it said that pre-shutdown and post-shutdown Chikara are two completely different eras for the company. And it kind of went from being a good alternative wrestling company that you could show to anyone to being a really niche wrestling company that you kind of had to be in the know of wrestling to really enjoy. But what would ultimately kill Chikara though would come during the pandemic, when owner Mike Quackenbush and several trainees were accused by a former female trainee of bullying, racism and homophobia. This led to many Chikara talent re-signing from the promotion following these accusations, and Mike Quackenbush would do the same, as it was announced on June 24, 2020 that the promotion would be shutting its doors and closing down permanently. Chikara was a promotion with a cult following, and a following which is probably all gone now and wouldn't be interested in a Chikara return, but it's been 4 years, so I highly doubt that we'll ever see Chikara make a comeback again. Control Your Narrative was a promotion started by EC3 in 2022 following his WWE departure, and it was a promotion that was doomed from the start, so let me explain why. EC3's return to WWE in 2018 was less than stellar. If you don't remember, EC3 first signed to the WWE in 2009 as Derek Bateman, where he never really did anything and kinda just jobbed before he left in 2013 to go to TNA, where he'd reform into EC3 and reinvent himself as a star. And like I said, he returned in 2018 to WWE, but unfortunately nothing changed in this return, and he was back to his jobbing ways, being part of the 24/7 jobber division and being released from the company on April 15th, 2020. After leaving the WWE though, there was excitement about what he would do next and a return to form for EC3. He would return to Impact and also have a run in Ring of Honor, but unfortunately, the stuff he was doing in those two companies just wasn't a hit whatsoever. He was doing a weird character where he was trying to free his narrative and control his narrative, and he ran a stable literally called Free the Narrative, and to be honest, the entire time EC3 did this gimmick, I just didn't get it. And I still don't get it. And I don't think I'm the only one. This gimmick really wasn't hitting, so when it was announced he'd be running a show in May 2021 based around the gimmick, it was met with skepticism. The show would be titled Free the Narrative and would be main evented by EC3 versus Matt Cardona. The show was filmed in a small dark room with weird music and voiceovers, and it was just awful. It was terrible and difficult to watch, the wrestling wasn't good, the voiceovers were nonsensical and needless. In fact, every aspect of production was nonsensical and needless in this entire show. It was really hard to understand what was going on, just like EC3's gimmick. But nonetheless, EC3 would run a second Free the Narrative show that same year, this time with Adam Scherr, aka Braun Strowman, in the main event against him, and this show was no better than the first one. If you want to see these shows for yourself, by the way, for whatever reason, then check the link in the description where myself and BDE reacted to some of these awful shows last year. But despite both of these shows being dreadful and having no appeal, EC3 still wanted to do more, and so in March of 2022, Control Your Narrative was born, and they would begin announcing blockbuster members of their roster: Wesley Blake, Killian Dane, Flip Gordon, Scotty 2 Hotty, Austin Aries were all a part of it, as well as the three main faces of the promotion, EC3, Braun Strowman, and Karrion Kross. They announced an international TV deal to go along with it, which was just that they would be airing their shows on Pro Wrestling TV, which was an app for pro wrestling shows to air on. Spoiler alert, they didn't air any actual weekly wrestling shows on here, and as far as I'm aware, this app also doesn't exist anymore and isn't in operation. So the TV deal was clearly a massive success. They also released merch, including the infamous We Live in a Society shirt, but what about the actual wrestling? Well, they ran one broadcasted show called The Awakening, and it was probably one of the worst wrestling shows I've ever seen. Pretty much all the same problems as the Free the Narrative shows, but just longer. Despite the low quality of shows and seemingly not many fans for the shows, they announced a nationwide tour of shows across the country. Control Your Narrative was moving quick, and maybe a little too quick, as not too long after the formation of CYN, Karrion Kross and Braun Strowman were both re-signed to the WWE and would leave EC3 and Control Your Narrative in the dust to return to the WWE. And the ticket sales for that big nationwide tour they were doing were not doing well, which without Cross or Strowman was always going to happen anyway because nobody was watching this show. And EC3 would ultimately pack it up with Control Your Narrative after just 4 months and after the brand lost all of its stars. EC3 is doing just fine now as the NWA World Champion, but says the stigma around Control Your Narrative damaged his career. There's one thing that's damaged for sure though, and that's my brain after watching Control Your Narrative. Now, after reading the words WhatCulture Pro Wrestling, you're probably thinking one of two things. You're thinking either, whoa, since when did WhatCulture have a wrestling promotion? Or you're thinking, damn, putting WCPW on here is pretty harsh. And I'll be honest, it definitely is harsh, because unlike Control Your Narrative, WCPW was really a solid product throughout the time it was around. However, there's no denying that certain decisions and big changes the company made hurt the company in the long run, and we'll get there in a second, but for now, let me talk to you about WhatCulture Pro Wrestling if you didn't even know it existed. WhatCulture Pro Wrestling, or WCPW, was announced in May of 2016 by the wrestling YouTube channel and website WhatCulture, of course. They would run a weekly show on YouTube titled Loaded and would start running monthly pay-per-views. They were mainly focused on the British wrestling scene, and their roster was mostly made up of wrestlers from BritRes, many of whom would go on to become big stars. Tegan Knox, Piper Niven, Joe Hendry, Kaylee Ray, Tyler Bate, Blair Davenport and Will Ospreay and many more were all BritRes stars who all turned up at WCPW at one point or another, but where WCPW stood apart from other indie promotions was all the international talent they used to bring in. For the first year of WCPW, we would see names like Kurt Angle, Cody Rhodes, Ricochet, Rey Mysterio, Drew McIntyre, The Young Bucks, Adam Cole, Matt Hardy, Matt Riddle, Bully Ray, Jay Lethal, EC3, Minoru Suzuki, and even guys like Damien Sandow and Jack Swagger. They were just some of the international stars at the time that featured on WCPW in their first year. And with this level of talent came some great moments, great matches, great shows, and a loyal fan base. However, this was not a sustainable business model, and WCPW weren't going to be able to spend on talent like they were doing forever, and that meant in 2017 that WCPW had to undergo some changes, and these changes would ultimately kill the company. The first big change would take place on the 30th of September 2017, about 18 months after the formation of WCPW, and it was announced that WCPW would be renaming to Defiant Wrestling. And I actually think it was the right move to rename the promotion. They clearly didn't want the WhatCulture name attached to the brand forever, and so they did something about it. The issue is though, is that WCPW was far superior to what Defiant was, and WCPW and Defiant were pretty much two entirely different companies. WCPW was a super indie that flew talent from all over the world and had them cross over and face each other, and that's where most of their viewership came from. Defiant, however, was just another BritRes promotion, and when they made the switch to Defiant, they also made the change to stop flying in international stars, meaning no more Codys, Rey Mysterios, and no more talent from elsewhere, and this killed viewership for the long run for Defiant, as while the talent they had was still decent and the shows weren't bad, they had alienated their fan base by doing this, as your average WCPW viewer was watching for the big international stars and not the local stars. And by the end of Defiant Wrestling's run, there weren't many fans that had still stuck around as compared to the WCPW days. Defiant existed for another year and a half before officially on the 2nd of August 2019, Defiant Wrestling shut its doors for good, with the last year of Defiant programming losing viewers with each event that passed. WCPW was good while they were around, but they definitely blew their load too early, and all in all, overall WCPW was fun, but it was never made to last. Recently, I did a video discussing all of Hulk Hogan's failed business ventures, and I briefly mentioned in that video that Hulk Hogan was a wrestling promoter for a bit of time. As in November of 2009, the Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin tour went down under to Australia for a week of wrestling shows across the country. And I need to talk about it in more detail than I did in that video, because these shows really were quite something, and I'm not quite sure what Hulk Hogan was cooking. So like I said, the Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin tour was a tour being promoted by Hulk Hogan and also Eric Bischoff. What could possibly go wrong? 4 shows across 4 Australian cities: Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and Brisbane. So what do we say we look at the results of the first night of these shows? Because Oh boy, Nick Dinsmore, formerly known as Eugene, and the Pimp Father, aka the Godfather, defeated Rock of Love. I have no idea who these guys are. Brutus Beefcake defeated Heidenreich. Spartan 3000, who was Matt Cross, defeated Shannon Moore. The Nasty Boys defeated Vampire Warrior and Black Pearl. Mr. Anderson defeated, is that Val Venus? My word, what is Hulk Hogan's obsession with Val Venus, man? And then we had a Too Cool reunion. Brian Christopher and Rikishi defeated Orlando Jordan and Osu Fatu, who is Umaga from WWE, if you remember him. A true legend of the game, a Streets Will Remember wrestler who, sadly, these were his final matches. It was on this tour before he passed away. These are his final wrestling matches. And then you had probably the oldest main event in wrestling history, Hulk Hogan defeating Ric Flair, and this was the main event of every single night of the tour. Yes, in the great year of 2009. To be fair, they also had the 52-year-old Brutus Beefcake on there. Like, I don't even know where to begin with this card. As you can tell, it's a complete Hogan and Friends card. Instead of using wrestlers from TNA, you know, the company he had just joined, he just decided to invite a load of his old washed-up wrestler friends, as well as just random talent. These shows were how Ric Flair came out of retirement, and so the Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin tour is the official blame for why we saw Ric Flair wrestling just last year. The rest of the tour, all their cards were pretty much the exact same as this card. It was a Hogan and Friends card with a Hulk Hogan and Flair main event. And I really wish official footage of these shows existed and was out there, because some of these matches on paper just look dreadful. Eugene versus Heidenreich, or how about a triple threat match between Rosie, Val Venus, and the Godfather? Who wants to watch this stuff? These sound unwatchable. And that's another thing, it is actually unwatchable because there is no official footage of these shows other than select fan footage and photos, and that's because following the conclusion of the tour, the Hulkamania tour company went bankrupt and plans of a DVD release and Australian TV broadcast were dropped. And supposedly Hulk Hogan was owed money by the promoters and refused to release the DVD until he was paid. I'm telling you, brother, you need to pay me at least 6 figures for this Heidenreich versus Brutus Beefcake match, dude. Ultimately though, we should probably be thanking Hogan for never releasing the footage, as these shows sound like they stink. In January 2014, Lucha Underground was announced to be coming to air on the El Rey network, a brand new wrestling promotion. Lucha Underground would assemble a star-studded roster of wrestlers from all over the world: John Morrison as Johnny Mundo, Ricochet as Prince Puma, the Lucha Bros, Chavo Guerrero, Sexy Star were all there from the start of the promotion. Lucha Underground began filming in September of that year, and the first episode would premiere on October 29th. And Lucha Underground, without a doubt, was the most interesting wrestling product I've seen in a long time. Lucha Underground was filmed in seasons like a TV drama, with an emphasis on the segments and stories between matches. And the matches themselves were fast-paced, super exciting, and the camera work and presentation was awesome. It was different and it was great. And throughout the first season of Lucha Underground, many stars would break out for the company. Sexy Star would become a fan favorite, and Helico would wow fans with his crazy high spots, as well as your top stars like Johnny Mundo, Cage, Puma, Phoenix, and Matanza holding it down in the world title division. As well as the world title, they had the Gift of the Gods title, which in short was pretty much a Money in the Bank type championship, and they also had the trios titles, which was the most exciting division in the company and my personal favorite. All in all, Lucha Underground Season 1 was a success. They introduced a unique wrestling concept on TV and really put out some good television. Season 2 would begin on January 27th, 2016 and was action-packed just like the first one. And whilst I don't think Season 2 was as good as the first, it saw the debuts of Rey Mysterio, Killshot aka Swerve Strickland, Cobra Moon aka Thunder Rosa, Taya Valkyrie, and many more. Season 3 then premiered in September 2016 and was pretty much the same as Season 2, except with this season there was a lot of weirdness. You know, like the Rabbit Tribe. Despite the weirdness though, it was still a good season and featured possibly the best match in the promotion's history, with Killshot versus Dante Fox. And then Season 4 would ultimately be the downfall of Lucha Underground, as most of Lucha Underground's top stars stars were gone, as Ricochet was in the WWE now, Sexy Star had been blacklisted, and Rey Mysterio had returned back to the WWE. And the roster for this season was an entirely different roster, with the likes of Jake Strong, aka Jack Swagger, Joey Mercury, and many others being introduced. This is the season where infamously Jake Strong won the world title on the final episode. Jake Strong did not fit in with Lucha Underground whatsoever, he didn't really have any business being there, and his run did not warrant a world title win whatsoever. Jake Strong would also end up being the final ever Lucha Underground champion, as Lucha Underground has not returned to air ever since a series of lawsuits from many of its former wrestlers. And this is for the fact that Lucha Underground contracts blocks them from working for other promotions, virtually trapping them in multi-year exclusive contracts. And keep in mind that Lucha Underground was filmed in seasons, and there would be months to years between seasons sometimes, meaning they couldn't work. It's now been nearly 6 years since the last Lucha Underground episode was aired, and whilst MLW did try to sort of revive it, we probably won't see any iteration of Lucha Underground ever again. Wrestling Society X was a short-lived wrestling show that aired on MTV in early 2003. And to describe Wrestling Society X, it's basically Lucha Underground but without all the cinematic storylines and more Michael Bay. It's probably the most 2000s TV show of all time. Explosions, action, impact, airing late night on MTV, showcasing 2000s goth indie wrestlers battling it out. And somehow this show's matches were even more fast-paced and action-packed than Lucha Underground. Wrestling Society X only aired for 9 episodes and has some pretty notable alumni. Seth Rollins, X-Pac, Matt Sydal, New Jack, Vampiro, Scorpio Sky, and Teddy Hart are a few names that you might recognize. Wrestling Society X only lasted for 2 months in total, airing from January 30th until March 14th, 2007, and as the series went on, the ratings got lower, and MTV clearly wanted out with the show, with episodes 4 to 9 being aired as a marathon across 2 days, as MTV were clearly trying to rush out the final episodes, which MTV later announced serves as the series finale before WSX was quietly removed from their schedule and airings of reruns were cancelled. MTV effectively just erased the series, probably due to the low ratings. There was actually a 10th episode that was filmed but never came to air as MTV shut the doors early, but this episode can be found in the Wrestling Society X DVD. Overall, I loved Wrestling Society X. It was never made to last, but it was kinda set up to fail from the start, and it's fun to look back on. MTV, bring this show back. After years of various pilot episodes and talks of a return, on the 25th of April 2018, it was announced that World of Sport Wrestling would be making its return to UK television, airing on ITV. Which, if you aren't British, ITV are one of the biggest TV networks here in the UK, and World of Sport Wrestling had originally aired on there from 1968 to 1985, having been a part of the World of Sport programming block on ITV, and this revival in 2018 was a long-awaited return for British wrestling on British TV. So as I said, World of Sport returned for a 10-episode mini-series, and the series aired on the ITV channel every Saturday from July 28th until September 29th, 2018. And it featured many wrestlers you might recognize today, such as Will Ospreay, Kaylee Ray aka Alba Fire, Viper aka Piper Niven, B Priestley aka Blair Davenport, Moose, Kip Sabian, Harry Smith, Doug Williams, Grado, and other wrestlers from the British scene. The show had 3 titles, a men's world title, a women's belt, and tag belts, with their first champions respectively being Dave Mastiff, Kaylee Ray, and Easton Reese and Kip Sabian. And from the episodes I've seen, the show seemed pretty solid. It had very good production, the action was watchable, and overall it was a good TV studio wrestling show. But like I said, this was only a 10-episode mini-series, and unfortunately it would be the only 10 episodes, as this World of Sport Wrestling revival ended up being fairly short-lived. As right after the series ended in September, the very next month the WWE NXT UK brand would make its debut with its own weekly show, and with that would come much of the top UK talent being signed to the WWE for the NXT UK brand. Combine that with AEW forming in 2019 and being picked up by ITV, and World of Sport would fizzle away, and it almost kind of feels like the revival never even happened, as it was that short-lived and insignificant. They'd do one last tour of untelevised shows in early 2019, and that's been about that for World of Sport. Ever since ITV picked up the AEW rights, nothing's been really heard or mentioned of World of Sport again, so we can only assume that the show was cancelled. And with the current wrestling landscape, I highly doubt we'll ever see World of Sport Wrestling make a return again. In 2014, 5 Star Wrestling was released for the PS3 by Serious Parody to critical acclaim. In a review written for Push Square by, Ben Potter, he wrote, "After the latest disappointment in the colossal WWE series, wrestling game fans may have found solace in the knowledge that a fresh contender was on the way to challenge for the genre's crown. Pitched as the wrestling equivalent of Pro Evolution Soccer, Serious Parody's 5 Star Wrestling intended to offer a fun alternative to everyone's favourite grappling simulator, but what we received instead is an even shallower substitute." Okay, so 5 Star Wrestling didn't go down all that well, but the next year, they would release 5 Star Wrestling Regenesis for the PS4. Wow, next gen, whoa, oh my god. The game was accompanied by its incredible roster of Andy Organ, Curtis Angel, Dynamite Pegasus, Greg Harty, Harvey D, Johnny the Bull Maivia, Mike Iceberg, and Ragnarok. Oh my word, what a star-studded roster. This 1-star review of the game read, "This is one of those games I can't be pissed about wasting the money on, as I'm laughing at how bad it is. Unless you can see humour in something this craptacular, avoid this one." So yeah, these games were literally just knockoff wrestling games. Like, they really didn't try, and they really didn't even try to hide it either. They just used knockoff fake parody names, and they were just cashing in on being like one of the first next-gen wrestling games, and being an alternative in a market that WWE dominates. And as you can see from the gameplay on screen, these games were very amateur looking. You know, they looked like Xbox arcade style, like, trash games. Like, remember some of the dump that got put on the Xbox Arcade? Like, this is a game just like that. However, 5 Star Wrestling somehow would stick around, and they would actually run a show in 2015. In September 2015, they would run a show in Edinburgh, and just like their video game, it was called 5 Star Wrestling Regenesis. They just gave it the same name. On the show, you had matches like Viper versus ODB, Viper aka Piper Niven, John Morrison versus Ricochet in a 2 out of 3 falls match, and people like Carlito, PJ Black, and others were a part of the card. Not a bad card for what seems to be just a live event, and kind of just like a one-off. You know, it looks like just to be like a one-off to promote their 5 Star Wrestling Regenesis video game. But then the next year in January 2016, they would return for more events under the 5 Star Wrestling name. They would come back for 3 days of events in Newcastle, Sheffield, and Liverpool. And having a look at this Newcastle card, it's very good. Will Ospreay, Jamie Hayter, Carlito, Rey Mysterio, Jay Lethal, Zack Sabre Jr., John Morrison, and AJ Styles are just some of the names that were on this card, with John Morrison versus AJ Styles for the 5 Star Wrestling title in the main event. And they ran the Newcastle Metro Radio Arena, an arena with 11k capacity. Like, that's huge for a wrestling company to be running that. And they had a whole attendance of 500 people. Sorry. They had a show with Rey Mysterio, John Morrison, AJ Styles. They booked it in an 11k arena and got 500 people that turned up for it? What? The next day, they ran their show in Sheffield. They had AJ Styles versus Rey Mysterio on the card, Jay Lethal versus PJ Black on the card, and a main event of John Morrison versus Carlito. They ran the Sheffield Arena, which has a capacity of 3,500, and they got a whole 300 people to turn up for it. For day 3, they ran in Liverpool, once again using pretty much all the same names, once again just in different variations of matches, and they ran the Echo Arena in Liverpool. It has a capacity of 11,000, and I don't have exact figures or any figures for this show, but it doesn't look like, you know, they were anywhere near to filling that out. And using all these names and booking all these arenas must have cost them a lot of money, and they didn't come back for another year, and I imagine it's probably because of that. They would come back a year later to run 5-Star Wrestling in Dundee. This featured John Morrison versus Moose, Rey Mysterio versus Aldis, Drew Galloway versus Chris Masters, and a main event of John Morrison versus Rey Mysterio. It was a one-night tournament for the title, and this show would actually be picked up for TV by Channel 5, aka Spike TV, wrestling back on Spike in the UK. So 5-Star have now managed to kind of put themselves on the map like regionally. They've managed to run a show on a UK based network, they got their show picked up for a special on TV, pretty good stuff, and it seemed as though their next step was to try take the world on, try get on the map across the entire world. And after these events, 5-Star announced that they would hold a 128-man tournament throughout 2017, and they would offer CM Punk $1 million to appear in the tournament and make his wrestling return. He of course refused, and the tournament would not happen, and they announced it would be postponed until February 2018. Everyone knew this tournament was not going to happen. Like, everyone was just laughing at this promotion because this was just an awfully ran, awfully promoted promotion. And when 5-Star Wrestling returned in 2018, they returned with a weekly TV show. Channel 3 Sports pulled out of a deal with Preston City Wrestling in order to work with 5-Star to promote shows in 2018. Did they think the tournament was still happening or something? Like, what? 5-Star seems to be taking this very seriously. They were holding press conferences announcing new titles like the Tap or Snap title. What on earth? And they were getting more names in there like Rob Van Dam and former Love Island contestant Adam Maxted. The top talent in the world. They ran 4 shows across the UK airing live on Free Sports. Names like RVD, John Morrison, Jake Hager, Rey Mysterio, Moose, Matt Riddle, Alberto Al Patron, and more. They'd film episodes and run episodes in Liverpool, Newcastle, Sheffield, Plymouth, and Belfast, booking the biggest of names and the biggest of arenas, getting absolutely no turnouts. And all those shows I just listed, those TV shows, those were the only shows that ever happened. On the 20th of March 2018, 5-Star would announce on Twitter that they were to cancel all their upcoming shows, owing to the folding of their parent company, Pro Wrestling UK. 5-Star Wrestling was over, just like that. 2 months from a TV deal that another wrestling company lost out on to give to 5-Star is over after 2 months because the company's done. And I mean, it was a matter of time before the company was going to fold. What they were doing just wasn't sustainable whatsoever, and everybody could tell they were literally playing TEW in real life. 5-Star Wrestling has never returned. Jake Hager finished as their world champion. How does this always happen? First Lucha Underground, now 5-Star Wrestling. And though 5-Star is gone, its clones and all the promotions that have been just like 5-Star aren't gone. I mean, just last year, we had Wrestling Entertainment Series, which was pretty much the exact same as 5-Star. It was the Authors of Pain's promotion. They booked the likes of Nia Jax and Alistair Overeem, the UFC fighter, Braun Strowman. None of them were paid apparently, or paid in advance. The show was being ran in an arena, like massive, 2 weeks in advance, and it never happened. It was literally a 5-Star clone. So it seems like the influence of 5-Star Wrestling does still live on. So, AOP of former WWE fame, who were released at some point in the last couple of years, came back from their hiatus and their weird NFT projects to announce that they would be running their own wrestling promotion. This promotion was entitled Wrestling Entertainment Series UK, and it was announced to be running a 10,000 seat arena in Nottingham at just about 4 weeks notice, and no card announced, which is, to say the least, a very ambitious promotional tactic. About a week later though, the card came out and it was pretty crazy. You had the main event of Adam Scherr versus Alistair Overeem, Nia Jax versus Lana, as well as people like Deonna Purrazzo, Chelsea Green, Mojo Rawley, Tennille Dashwood, Killer Cross, Mike Bennett, Jonah, Lindsay Dorado, Samurai Del Sol, Biff Busick, and many, many more. It was a star-studded card, and it was something that UK wrestling really needs a bit more of, which is foreign wrestlers coming over, these big names coming in from America, and it was just something that British wrestling needs. But the issue is that once again, they were running a 10k seater in 3 weeks advance notice. So how well is this actually gonna go? I was really interested in the show. I was a big fan of a lot of the people who were on it, and I was going to go to the show, and also got very close to scheduling an interview with AOP themselves, to the point where I was literally texting their manager on WhatsApp. But when I tried to arrange a time and day, I was ghosted by the manager. And then the next day, Chelsea Green put out that tweet saying that the show had been cancelled, confusing everyone as there had been no communication from Wes themselves and their official accounts, until the next day when it was officially announced by Wes that their show had been postponed to what was meant to be today, July 9th. And with that came Deonna Purrazzo, Chelsea Green and Tenille Dashwood all publicly pulling themselves from the show, with Chelsea and Tenille stating that they had a previous existing booking on that day, so they can't make it to Wes, and Deonna Purrazzo saying that the whole thing has been very frustrating, she won't be appearing, and put postponed in quotation marks in her statement, putting into question once again whether this show is actually happening or not. No one really knows anything about it anymore. And you'd think from here that Wes would start promoting their show for the next month. But no, they virtually went silent only until about 2 weeks before the show, and when they came back to start promoting the show again, the card was entirely different. No Adam Scherr, no Lana, no Deonna Purrazzo, and despite the fact that she was promoted, Nia Jax wasn't actually going to be appearing, and had to clarify this twice on Twitter because Wes just kept promoting that she was showing up when she wasn't. They added some new names to the card as well, including Moose, Steph DeLander, formerly known as Persia Pirotta, Eric Young, Big Damo, as well as some BritRes talent such as the She-Wolves, Anastasia, and Zack Zodiac, who is Paige's brother if you aren't aware. And still, it's still a very decent card, but by this point, I think a lot of people were suspicious, if not certain, that this show was not taking place. And eventually the suspicion and certainty turned into full confidence that the show was 110% not happening when Matthew Raywalt, who was meant to be a commentator for the show, wrote a Twitter thread on how he has been absolutely screwed over by the company. So Wes Official TV has cost me time and now cost me income. I was asked to be on this show but had a conflicting booking. I was told they really wanted me and would pay me up front, so as they were former colleagues I took them at their word and passed on my other booking. And since I have been completely ghosted, zero communication, I have friends booked for the show and luckily some of them have been paid already, but I doubt the show will happen. No travel, hotel or any pertinent information has been shared with anyone I know. Now I'm also out a weekend of income due to them. Part of that is on me as I chose to forego my other date, but as I said, I was told repeatedly that for sure this was happening and they wanted me to be there. I would be very wary of buying a ticket or the broadcast of this show. Well, that settles it. This show is 100% not happening. They were officially now just being looked at as a 5-star wrestling 2.0. But Wes continued to promote their show until just a few days ago when they released this statement. Dear fans and followers, unfortunately we will have to cancel the event scheduled for this Saturday at the Motorpoint Arena in Nottingham, England. We are deeply disappointed in the news that we have to share, but with so many talent not showing up, we will have no choice than to cancel the event. Our team works so hard on this event day in and day out for the fans to come out with a different type of wrestling event, and believe that we will still be able to show that in the near future. We do want to say that all our talent that was scheduled have been paid in full, and that Lena Finane was paid her deposit as well while she changed her mind and did not want to show up and wrestle anymore. For now, we will have to apologise for this, but we promise that it will not end here. See you soon, Team Wes. Wow, there are so many red flags with this statement. First of all, they completely blamed the talent and said it was them who didn't show up, and they specifically singled out Lena or Nia Jax, almost implying that she was the biggest offender. It was one of the most unprofessional statements I've ever seen. And something that a lot of people also had a problem with within this statement was the fact there was no mention of tickets or pay-per-view purchases being refunded. Luckily, they quickly posted a follow-up tweet stating that all purchases will be refunded. So that's good news. I don't know how many people actually bought the pay-per-view, but it's good to know that all 350 ticket purchasers would be getting refunds. Yeah, that's right. Only 350 people bought tickets to the show out of the 10,000 plus that were available. That is absolutely hilarious and honestly completely expected. 5-star wrestling 2.0. It's uncanny at this point. Oh yeah, also, you know in their statement where it said all wrestlers booked were paid? Well, apparently not, as none of the British wrestlers on the show were reportedly paid. Not only were these wrestlers robbed of a big platform and opportunity for them, and an opportunity to work with some big names, but they've had money taken from them. It's just straight up carny from Wes at this point. But Mojo Rawley, who was booked for Wes as well and was in the UK waiting for the show to happen, bless him, has took it upon himself to host a meet and greet which is free for any Wes ticket purchaser, and any money that is made from people outside that category is going straight towards the British wrestlers who didn't get paid, which is pure class from Mojo or Dean there, so huge props to him for that. And yeah, if you go onto Wes's website now, there's a big banner that says the show is cancelled.